A father's hands trembled as he pointed at his own daughter, standing in the dirt outside Murphy's saloon. "The girl for the horse," he slurred, loud enough for half the town to hear. "Straight trade." The men went quiet. Even in Red Hollow, Wyoming, where decent folk were scarce and mercy scarcer, some lines weren't meant to be crossed. But Thomas Whitmore had just crossed it, offering up 19-year-old Clara like she was livestock he couldn't afford to feed. One man stepped forward, and what he did next would change everything. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The August sun beat down on Red Hollow like a punishment nobody deserved, but everybody got anyway. The kind of heat that made men mean and whiskey seem like medicine. Clara Whitmore stood in the narrow band of shade beside Murphy's saloon, pretending she couldn't hear what was happening 10 feet away. But she could hear everything. "I'm telling you, Mercer, she's a hard worker. Cooks, cleans, reads, and writes better than most men in this town." Her father's voice carried that particular thickness that came around noon when he'd already emptied half a bottle. "And you need help with those boys of yours, don't you? Everyone knows it." Clara's fingers tightened around the book she'd been trying to read. The pages blurred. She'd known this morning would be bad when her father had forced her into town, muttering about sorting things out and making arrangements. She just hadn't known how bad. "Thomas, you're drunk." Caleb Mercer's voice was flat, carefully neutral. "Go home. Sleep it off." "I'm drunk, but I ain't stupid." Thomas Whitmore swayed slightly, one hand braced against the saloon's exterior wall. "You got that chestnut gelding I seen you riding. Big horse. Strong. That's a valuable animal." There was a long pause. Clara could picture the scene without looking. Her father, shirt-stained and half untucked, stubble dark on his hollow cheeks. And Caleb Mercer, probably standing very still the way dangerous men did when they were deciding whether to walk away or throw a punch. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Caleb's tone had changed, gone colder. "A trade." Her father said it loud, making sure the other men loitering near the saloon could hear, making it public so there'd be no backing out. "The horse for the girl, fair and square." Someone whistled low. Another man coughed. Clara's stomach twisted into something that felt like broken glass. She should have run, should have walked away right then, down the dusty street and out of Red Hollow entirely, just kept walking until her feet bled and the town disappeared behind her. But running took money, took courage, took somewhere to run to. Clara had none of those things. "Jesus Christ, Thomas." That was Bill Murphy, the saloon owner, his voice disgusted. "That's your own daughter?" "And she's eating me out of house and home," Thomas shot back. 19 years old and no prospects. No man's going to marry her, not with the reputation this family's got. At least this way she'd have a roof over her head, and I'd have a horse. Caleb finished the sentence. "You'd have a horse." Exactly. Now you're understanding me." Clara finally looked up from her book. Caleb Mercer stood in the street like he'd been carved from something harder than the Wyoming bedrock. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes that had seen better days. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see his jaw working, muscles tight. He was 36, maybe 37. A widower with 3 sons and a struggling ranch north of town. She'd seen him before, of course. Red Hollow wasn't big enough to be a stranger to anyone, but they'd never spoken. Men like Caleb Mercer didn't speak to girls like Clara Whitmore. "She's a person, Thomas, not a piece of property." "Law says different." Her father's voice turned ugly. "Law says she's mine until some man takes her off my hands, so I'm offering. You interested or not?" Clara felt every eye on the street turn toward her. The weight of their stares made her skin crawl. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the dust and blow away with the tumbleweeds. Caleb Mercer turned slowly, and for the first time, he looked directly at her. Their eyes met across the distance. His were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds before rain that never came. There was something in that gaze she couldn't quite read. Not pity, which would have destroyed her, not disgust, something else, something considering. "How old are you?" he asked. Clara's throat felt like sandpaper. 19. "You want this?" The question was quiet, meant only for her. Honest answer. What kind of question was that? Want to be traded like livestock? Want to leave the only home she'd ever known, miserable as it was? To live with a stranger and his children? Want to have the whole town know that her own father valued her less than a horse? But the honest answer, the one that crawled up from somewhere deep and desperate inside her, was different than what she expected. I want out of this town, she heard herself say. One way or another. Caleb nodded slowly, like she'd just confirmed something he'd already guessed. Then he turned back to Thomas Whitmore and the growing crowd of spectators. All right, he said. I'll take her. The words fell into the afternoon heat like stones into still water. Ripples of shock spread through the watching men. Now hold on, Bill Murphy started. You'll take her? Thomas's face split into a grin that made Clara's stomach turn. You mean it? The horse is No. Caleb cut him off. No horse. I'll take the girl, Clara, away from here. Give her a place to stay, food to eat, work if she wants it. But you don't get a damn thing, Thomas. Not the horse, not money, not a bottle of whiskey, nothing. You're trading your daughter for the privilege of not having to look at her anymore, and remember what a worthless piece of shit you are as a father. The grin slid off Thomas's face. Now, wait just a minute. Those are the terms, Caleb said flatly. You want her gone? She's gone. But you don't profit from it. Not 1 cent. That ain't fair. We had a deal. We don't have anything. Caleb's voice could have cut glass. You put your own child up like auction livestock in front of half the town. There is no deal. There's me doing something that should have been done years ago, getting her away from you. Thomas lunged forward, but he was too drunk and too slow. Caleb didn't even flinch as the older man stumbled and caught himself against a hitching post. You son of a bitch, Thomas spat. You can't just... I can, and I am. Caleb looked past him to Clara. Get your things, whatever you want to take with you. We're leaving in 20 minutes. Clara stood frozen, the book still clutched in her hands. Well? Caleb's expression softened slightly. Unless you'd rather stay. That broke the spell. Clara moved, brushing past her father without a word, walking quickly down the street toward the sagging house at the edge of town. Behind her, she could hear Thomas still shouting, his voice getting shriller and more desperate. This ain't right. She's my daughter. I got rights. You gave up those rights when you tried to trade her for a horse, someone called back. Clara thought it might be Bill Murphy. Leave it be, Thomas. Clara didn't look back. Her hands shook as she pushed open the door to the house, stepping into the dim interior that smelled like old cooking grease and stale beer. Home, if you could call it that. What did she own that was worth taking? She grabbed her mother's old canvas bag from the closet and began stuffing things inside. 2 dresses, both faded and patched. Underclothes. The book she'd been reading, David Copperfield, borrowed from the church library before the preacher's wife had decided Clara wasn't respectable enough to borrow books anymore. Another book, this one actually hers, a collection of Walt Whitman poems her mother had owned. Her mother's locket lay in a small wooden box under her mattress. Clara had hidden it there years ago after her father tried to sell it for drinking money. She grabbed it now, fastening the delicate chain around her neck. The metal was warm against her skin. What else? Looking around the bare room, Clara realized how little she actually had. 19 years of living, and everything she owned fit in a single bag with room to spare. The door banged open. Thomas stood in the doorway, breathing hard. You think you're better than me? His words slurred together. Think you're going to run off and play house with Caleb Mercer and his brats? I think, Clara said quietly, not looking at him, that you just tried to trade me for a horse. So no, I don't think I'm better than you. I know I am. His hand shot out and grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You ungrateful little... Let go. I fed you, kept a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me? Clara wrenched her arm free, stumbling back against the wall. You haven't fed me in months. I've been feeding myself with the money I earned taking in washing and mending. The only thing you've kept over my head is the threat of violence. Thomas's face went red. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually hit her. He'd done it before, usually when he was this drunk and feeling sorry for himself. But footsteps sounded on the porch, and Caleb Mercer filled the doorway. He didn't say anything, didn't have to, just stood there taking up space, his presence changing the entire atmosphere of the room. Thomas deflated like a punctured bladder. She's got a smart mouth on her. You'll see. Nothing but trouble, that girl." "Then you should be glad to be rid of her," Caleb said evenly. "Clara, you ready?" She grabbed the bag and her mother's old shawl. Yes. Walking past her father for what she somehow knew would be the last time felt like stepping out of a grave. Clara half expected him to grab her again, to stop her, to do something. But Thomas just stood there, swaying slightly, watching her go with an expression that might have been regret if he'd been capable of it. Outside, Caleb's wagon waited in the street. A few townspeople still lingered, watching the spectacle. Clara recognized some of them. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store and had always looked at Clara like she was something dirty that needed sweeping out. Old Pete, who worked at the livery. Sarah Cunningham, who used to be Clara's friend before her parents decided the Whitmores were too disreputable to associate with. None of them met her eyes now. Caleb took Clara's bag and set it in the wagon bed with an efficiency that suggested he'd been thinking about this, planning it. His chestnut horse, the one that had started this whole disaster, stood tied to the back of the wagon, tail swishing at flies. "Up you go," Caleb said, offering his hand. Clara hesitated for just a moment, then took it. His palm was calloused, rough from years of ranch work, but his grip was steady as he helped her onto the wagon seat. Then he walked around to the other side and climbed up beside her. "Mercer!" Thomas had emerged from the house, stumbling toward them. "You can't do this! That's my daughter!" Caleb picked up the reins. "She's 19 years old, Thomas, old enough to make her own choices. And she's choosing to leave." "I'll get the sheriff! This is kidnapping!" "The sheriff was standing right there when you tried to trade her for my horse," Caleb said quietly. He didn't say a word. Funny, that. Clara glanced over and realized he was right. Sheriff Coleman stood in the shade of the saloon, arms crossed, watching everything with an unreadable expression. He caught her looking and just shook his head slightly, like he was washing his hands of the whole affair. "Damn you!" Thomas shouted. "Damn you both to—" Caleb clicked his tongue, and the wagon lurched forward. Clara gripped the edge of the seat as they rolled down the main street of Red Hollow, past the saloon and the general store and the church where her mother was buried. People watched them go. Some looked shocked. Some looked disgusted. Mrs. Henderson actually spat in the dirt as they passed. Clara kept her eyes forward, her spine straight. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. They rode in silence as Red Hollow fell away behind them, the buildings getting smaller until they disappeared entirely into the endless Wyoming prairie. The sun beat down relentlessly. Dust from the wagon wheels hung in the still air. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Caleb finally spoke. "There's a canteen under the seat. Water's fresh." Clara found it and took a small sip, then offered it to him. He shook his head. More silence. The wagon wheels creaked. The chestnut horse whinnied softly. "I have 3 boys," Caleb said eventually, his eyes on the horizon. "Wyatt's 14. Ben's 11. Little Matthew just turned 8. Their mother died 3 years ago, influenza." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "The house is a mess. I try, but ranching takes all day, every day, and the boys, well, they need more than I can give them. I burn dinner more often than not. The youngest still has nightmares. Wyatt's angry at the world, and I don't know how to fix it." He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "I'm telling you this so you know what you're walking into. It's not pretty, it's not easy. And if you want to change your mind, I'll take you to the next town over, Sweetwater, about 2 days' ride, and give you enough money to start somewhere new. Somewhere nobody knows your father or what happened today." Clara considered this. The offer was generous, more generous than she'd expected. She could take the money, disappear, maybe find work in a hotel or as a shop girl, start over completely. But something in her resisted that idea. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was just exhaustion. The thought of starting over alone felt impossible. "What would you want from me?" she asked carefully. "If I stay, I mean. At your ranch." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Help with the boys, cooking, mending, basic things. I'm not asking for—" He stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You'd have your own room, your own space. Nobody would bother you. And if I want to leave later, then you leave. I'm not your father, Clara. I'm not keeping you prisoner." The way he said her name, careful, respectful, made something loosen in her chest. "All right," she said. I'll stay, for now. Caleb nodded once, like they'd just concluded a business arrangement, which Clara supposed they had. They rode on as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. The land opened up around them, rolling prairie that stretched forever, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and stands of cottonwood trees marking creek beds. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said eventually. "Sure." "Why did you do it? Take me, I mean. You could have just walked away." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Because I knew if I didn't, someone else would. And they might not have been asking what you wanted." Clara thought about the other men who'd been watching outside the saloon. Old Pete with his wandering hands, the Morrison brothers who were known for being rough with women. Yeah, she could imagine any number of them making a deal with Thomas Whitmore. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've met the boys." That startled a laugh out of her. Brief, unexpected. Caleb's mouth twitched slightly, not quite a smile, but close. The sun was touching the horizon when they finally turned off the main road onto a narrower track. Claire could see buildings in the distance, a house, a barn, a few outbuildings, the Mercer ranch. As they got closer, she could make out the details. The house was 2 stories, wood-framed, with a porch that wrapped around the front. It had probably been nice once, but time and weather had beaten it down. Paint peeled from the siding, several shutters hung crooked. The porch steps sagged in the middle. The barn looked in slightly better shape, at least structurally sound. Chickens scattered as the wagon approached. A dog, some kind of mixed breed with floppy ears, came running toward them, barking enthusiastically. "That's Duke," Caleb said. "Useless as a guard dog, but the boys love him." 3 figures emerged from the barn, shading their eyes against the setting sun. The boys, Clara realized. She could make out their shapes, but not their faces yet. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Duke jumped up, putting his paws on the wagon side, tail wagging furiously. Caleb climbed down first, then turned to help Clara. The 3 boys stood in a line, staring at her like she was a ghost. The oldest, Wyatt, was tall for 14, with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. His expression was closed off, suspicious. The middle boy, Ben, was smaller, skinnier, with lighter hair and a gap between his front teeth. He looked curious but wary. Little Matthew barely came up to his brother's shoulders. He had the same coloring as Ben, but rounder cheeks, still carrying some baby fat. His eyes were wide. "Boys," Caleb said, "this is Clara Whitmore. She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping out around the ranch." None of them said anything. The silence stretched out awkwardly. Finally, Matthew whispered to Ben, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Is she going to be our new ma?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "She's not your mother. Your mother is gone, and nobody's replacing her. Clara's here to help, that's all." Wyatt's expression darkened further. "We don't need help." "Yes," Caleb said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We do." Clara stood there with her bag at her feet, feeling every bit as out of place as she probably looked. These boys didn't want her here. Their father had brought her out of some combination of pity and practicality, and she'd just left everything she'd ever known, terrible as it was, for this. "I'll show you the house," Caleb said to Clara, picking up her bag. "Boys, finish up with the evening chores, then come inside for supper." "What's supper?" Wyatt muttered. "There isn't any." "Then I guess Clara will have to figure something out," Caleb said evenly. "Won't you?" It wasn't really a question. Clara nodded. Inside, the house was exactly what Caleb had warned her about. A disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, crusted with old food, dust thick on every surface, cobwebs in the corners. The floor hadn't been properly swept in weeks, maybe months. But underneath the mess, Clara could see the bones of a good home. Solid construction, large windows that would let in plenty of light if someone cleaned them. A kitchen with a decent stove and good counter space. "Your room's upstairs," Caleb said, leading her up a staircase that creaked with every step. "Second door on the right." The room was small but had a window facing west. A narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand. Spartan, but clean, or at least cleaner than the rest of the house. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall," Caleb continued. "We've got running water, which is more than most ranches. Came with the house when I bought it." Clara set her bag on the bed. Through the window she could see the barn and beyond it, the prairie stretching toward distant hills. "I'll leave you to settle in," Caleb said. "Come down whenever you're ready." He left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Clara stood alone in the strange room, in the strange house, on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a widower and his 3 hostile sons. What the hell had she just done? Her hands were shaking. Clara sat down hard on the bed, pressing her palms against her thighs to steady them. The enormity of the day crashed over her all at once. Her father's betrayal, the public humiliation, leaving Red Hollow, the uncertain future stretching ahead. She could still feel the weight of all those eyes on her in town, could still hear Mrs. Henderson's disgusted spit hitting the dirt. The girl bought for a horse. That's what they'd call her now. That's what she'd be known as, if anyone bothered to remember her at all. Clara's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Crying wouldn't change anything, wouldn't make the boys like her or the house less of a disaster, or her father less of a bastard. She stood up, unpacked her few belongings mechanically, and splashed cold water on her face from the washstand. Then she went downstairs to figure out how to make supper out of whatever she could find. The kitchen was worse up close. Clara opened the pantry and found it barely stocked. Some flour, salt, a few cans of beans, half a bag of cornmeal. The cold box outside held a small amount of bacon and some questionable-looking eggs. Not much to work with, but she'd made do with less. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. First, she built up the fire in the stove. Then she started on the dishes, heating water and scrubbing away crusted food until her hands were red. While the water heated for coffee, she mixed up cornbread batter and got it in the oven. The bacon went into a pan and she scrambled the eggs with some wild onions she'd spotted growing by the back door. It wasn't fancy, but by the time the boys trooped in from their chores, food was on the table. They stared at it like they weren't sure it was real. "Sit down," Caleb said, taking his place at the head of the table. "And wash your hands first." They obeyed, though Wyatt took his sweet time about it. When they were all seated, silence fell except for the sound of forks on plates. Clara had taken the smallest portion, unsure if there'd be enough. But the boys ate like they were starving, which, given what Caleb had said about his cooking, they probably were. Matthew was the first to speak. "This is good," he said, his mouth half full. "Don't talk with your mouth full," Wyatt snapped. "You're not the boss of me." "Boys," Caleb said quietly, and they both subsided. More silence. Clara pushed food around her plate, suddenly not hungry. "Thank you," Ben said abruptly, looking at her. "For cooking, I mean." "You're welcome." Wyatt made a sound that might have been a scoff. Clara ignored him. After supper, she cleared the dishes and washed them while the boys did homework at the table, or tried to. She could hear Caleb helping Matthew sound out words from a primer. Ben worked on arithmetic problems, his pencil scratching against paper. Wyatt sat apart from them, staring at a book without turning any pages. "Wyatt, you got homework?" Caleb asked. "Did it already." "Let me see it." "I said I did it already." The teenage anger in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't push. "Fine. Then help your brother with his reading." Wyatt slammed his book shut and stalked out of the room. A moment later, the front door banged. "Let him go," Caleb said when Ben started to get up. "He'll come back when he's ready." Clara dried the last dish and hung up the towel. The kitchen was cleaner than it had been in months, probably, but there was still so much to do. The floors, the windows, the rest of the house. Tomorrow. She'd tackle it tomorrow. "Clara?" Matthew was looking at her with those wide eyes. "Do you know any stories?" "Matthew, it's late," Caleb started. "Please?" The boy's voice was small. "Just one." Clara glanced at Caleb, who shrugged slightly. "All right," she said, "just one." She sat down in the chair Wyatt had vacated, and Matthew immediately scooted closer. Ben pretended not to be interested, but she noticed he stopped working on his arithmetic. "Once upon a time," Clara began, pulling a story from memory, one her mother used to tell her, "there was a boy who wanted to touch the stars." She wove the tale out of half-remembered fragments and pure invention, watching the tension drain out of Matthew's small shoulders, seeing even Ben get drawn in despite himself. Caleb leaned back in his chair, listening. When she finished, Matthew was yawning. "Bedtime," Caleb announced. "All of you." "But," Matthew started. "Bed." The boys trooped upstairs, Ben half dragging Matthew, who was protesting sleepily. Clara heard the thump of feet overhead, the sound of water running, doors closing. She and Caleb were alone in the kitchen. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Do what? The story? Any of it? The cooking, the cleaning, the story? You just got here." Clara shrugged. "You said you needed help, so I'm helping." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "Your father's a fool." "Yes," Clara agreed quietly. "He is. For what it's worth, I meant what I said earlier. Nobody owns you here. You're free to leave whenever you want. I'll make sure you have the means to do it." "I know. Do you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Because I need you to understand something, Clara. What happened today in town, what your father did, that doesn't define you. It doesn't make you less than anyone else. And if anyone on this ranch treats you like it does, you tell me." The fierceness in his voice surprised her. Clara met his eyes and saw nothing but complete sincerity. "Okay," she whispered. He nodded, satisfied, then stood, stretching. "I'm heading to bed. You should too. Morning comes early on a ranch." "I will. In a few minutes." After he'd gone upstairs, Clara sat alone in the quiet kitchen. Through the window, she could see stars emerging in the darkening sky, thousands of them, more than she'd ever seen in town where the lights drowned them out. She thought about her mother, who'd loved stars, who'd told Clara stories about constellations and made wishes on the first star each evening, who'd died when Clara was 12, leaving her alone with Thomas Whitmore. "I got out, Mama," Clara whispered to the empty room. "I finally got out." Outside, Duke barked once. A horse whinnied softly in the barn. The house settled around her with creaks and sighs. For the first time in 7 years, Clara went to bed not afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Uncertain, yes. Anxious, absolutely. But not afraid. And that was something. Clara woke to the sound of something crashing downstairs. She bolted upright in the unfamiliar bed, heart hammering, momentarily confused about where she was. Then it all came rushing back. Red Hollow, her father, the wagon ride, this ranch. The gray light of dawn filtered through the window. Another crash, followed by raised voices. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find the kitchen in chaos. Matthew stood on a chair trying to reach something on a high shelf. Ben was on the floor picking up pieces of a broken plate, and Wyatt leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching the disaster unfold with grim satisfaction. "What happened?" Clara asked. "Matthew was trying to get the flour down," Ben explained, his face flushed. "I told him to wait, but—" "I can do it myself," Matthew insisted, still stretching for the shelf. "You clearly can't," Wyatt said. "Look at the mess you made." "Where's your father?" Clara moved toward Matthew before he could fall off the chair. "Already out," Wyatt said. "He leaves before sunrise. Didn't he tell you?" The condescension in his voice was thick enough to spread on bread. Clara ignored it and lifted Matthew down from the chair. "I was hungry," the boy said defensively. "I know. Let me help." Clara retrieved the flour and set it on the counter. "Anyone else hungry?" Ben nodded eagerly. Wyatt just shrugged. She surveyed the pantry again in the growing light. Still not much to work with, but she found some dried apples and a bit of cinnamon. Within 30 minutes, she had pancakes going on the griddle and the kitchen smelling better than it had in years, probably. The boys ate without talking much. Wyatt finished first and stood to leave. "Dishes," Clara said. He turned to stare at her. "What?" "Your dish. Put it in the sink. I've got chores to do. Then it'll take you 2 extra seconds to put your dish in the sink on your way out." Clara met his challenging gaze steadily. Everyone carries their own weight in this house. For a moment she thought he might argue, might tell her she had no authority here, but something in her expression must have convinced him it wasn't worth the fight. He grabbed his plate, dumped it in the sink with a clatter, and stalked out. Ben and Matthew exchanged glances. "He's always like that," Matthew offered. "Mean, I mean." "He's not mean," Ben said quietly. "He's just angry." "At what?" Ben shrugged. "Everything. Ma dying, Pa working all the time, being stuck here." Clara understood that kind of anger. She'd felt it herself often enough, trapped in Red Hollow, with a drunk for a father and no way out. At least she recognized it for what it was, pain with nowhere to go. "Well," she said, clearing her own plate, "angry or not, he can put his dishes in the sink like everyone else." Matthew giggled at that. The first week passed in a blur of work. Clara had thought she understood what hard work meant, But the ranch taught her she'd barely scratched the surface. There was always something that needed doing: cooking, cleaning, mending, washing. The house fought her at every turn. She'd clean her room only to find it dusty again by evening. She'd wash clothes and hang them to dry, and a sudden wind would blow half of them into the dirt. The boys were no help. Matthew tried, at least, but he was 8 and mostly just got underfoot. Ben did what he was told, but never volunteered for anything extra, and Wyatt avoided her entirely, disappearing into ranch work from dawn until well past dark. Caleb she barely saw. He left before she woke and came back after sunset, exhausted and covered in dirt. They'd eat together in near silence. Then he'd check the boys' homework before collapsing into bed. On the 8th day, Clara woke up angry. She'd been scrubbing the same kitchen floor for a week, and it still looked filthy. The boys tracked in mud faster than she could clean it up. The stove was older than she was and temperamental, requiring constant adjustment to keep food from burning. And last night, she'd found mice droppings in the pantry. Mice. She'd left one disaster for another, apparently. Clara attacked the morning chores with grim determination. She made breakfast. More pancakes because it was easy and the boys would eat them. She cleaned the kitchen. She started on a mountain of mending that had been shoved into a corner of the sitting room. Shirts with missing buttons, pants with holes in the knees, socks that needed darning. Around mid-morning, she heard boots on the porch. The door opened and Caleb came in, which was unusual. He normally didn't come back to the house until dinner. "Something wrong?" Clara asked, looking up from the shirt she was mending. "Fence broke on the north pasture. Need to fix it before the cattle wander off." He grabbed a canteen from a hook by the door. "Probably be at it most of the day. You need help?" He looked surprised. "You know anything about mending fences?" "No, but I can learn." Caleb studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "It's hot work. Heavy. You've got enough to do here. The mending can wait." Clara set down the shirt. "If the fence breaks, the cattle get out. That seems more important than buttons." Something shifted in his expression. "All right. Come on then." They rode out on horseback. Caleb on a big bay gelding, Clara on an older mare named Bessie, who seemed perfectly content to plod along at a leisurely pace. The morning sun beat down as they crossed open prairie toward the broken fence line. When they reached it, Clara saw the problem immediately. Several fence posts had rotted through at the base and finally given way, bringing down a long section of barbed wire. "We'll need to replace the posts first," Caleb explained, swinging down from his horse. "Dig new holes, set them in, let them settle, then restring the wire." "How deep do the holes need to be?" "About 3 feet. Rocky soil here, so it's slow going." He handed her a shovel. Clara had never dug a fence post hole in her life, but she'd be damned if she'd admit that now. She picked a spot and started digging. The ground was exactly as hard as Caleb had warned. Every shovelful felt like she was trying to dig through concrete. Within 10 minutes, her hands were blistering. Within 20, sweat soaked through her dress. Caleb worked on the hole next to hers, moving with practiced efficiency. He'd already dug down a foot while Clara had barely managed 6 inches. "You don't have to prove anything," he said without looking up. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to dig a hole. Your hands are bleeding." Clara looked down. He was right. The shovel handle had rubbed her palms raw. "They'll heal." Caleb sighed, set down his shovel, and came over to inspect her hands. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he turned them palm up, examining the blisters. "You should have said something." "And then what? You'd send me back to the house?" "I'd give you gloves." He pulled a pair from his back pocket and handed them to her. "They're too big, but they're better than nothing." The gloves were indeed too big, but Clara put them on anyway. They helped. They worked in silence after that, the sun climbing higher. Around noon, Caleb called a break, and they sat in the shade of a scraggly cottonwood tree, sharing water from the canteen and jerky from Caleb's saddlebag. "Why'd you really want to come out here?" Caleb asked. Clara took a drink before answering. "The house was making me crazy." "The house. It's just—" She struggled to find the words. "I clean, and it never stays clean. I cook, and everyone eats, and then it's time to cook again. Everything I do gets undone. At least out here, when we fix the fence, it stays fixed." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "That's ranch life. Hell, that's just life. Nothing stays done." "I know that. I needed to see something through, start to finish, see the result." He nodded slowly, like that made sense to him. The house was a wreck when my wife was alive, too. 3 boys and a ranch. You can't keep ahead of it. She used to say the dust was winning. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife voluntarily. Clara treaded carefully. What was her name? Elizabeth. Beth. His voice went soft. She hated ranching, actually. Came from back east, met me when I was working railroad construction in Pennsylvania. Followed me out here like a damn fool. She must have loved you. Or been too stubborn to admit she'd made a mistake. But there was warmth in his voice, not bitterness. She never complained, though, not once. Even at the end, when the fever had her so bad she couldn't breathe right, she kept trying to get out of bed, kept saying the boys needed her. Clara didn't know what to say to that. The grief in his voice was still fresh, still raw, even 3 years later. Wyatt looks like her, Caleb continued. Same dark hair, same stubborn set to the jaw. Drives me crazy sometimes, seeing her face looking back at me with all that anger. He's 14, Clara said. 14-year-olds are supposed to be angry. Were you? At 14? She thought about it. Yeah, I was furious. My mother had just died and I was stuck with a father who blamed me for existing. So yes, I was angry. What changed? Nothing changed. I just learned to swallow it. Clara pulled at a tuft of grass. Being angry didn't help anything. Didn't bring my mother back, didn't make my father love me, so I stopped showing it. Buried it down deep. Caleb looked at her with something that might have been understanding. That's a lonely way to live. Safer, though. Maybe. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. Come on, let's finish this fence. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the sun was setting and Clara's entire body ached. Her hands throbbed despite the gloves. Her back screamed. Her legs could barely grip the saddle. But the fence was fixed. They dug the holes, set the posts, restrung the wire. It was done, and it would stay done, at least for a while. The boys were already inside when they got back. Clara could hear them arguing about something. I should make dinner, she said, dismounting with a wince. I'll do it, Caleb said. You've done enough today. You can't cook? I can manage beans and cornbread. Go rest. She wanted to argue, but her body vetoed the idea. Clara made it upstairs, peeled off her filthy dress, and collapsed onto the bed. She meant to close her eyes for just a minute. When she woke, it was dark, and someone had covered her with a blanket. Voices drifted up from downstairs, the boys talking, Caleb's deeper voice responding. The smell of food, burnt around the edges but edible. Clara smiled despite the pain and drifted back to sleep. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Clara learned to pace herself, to not fight battles that couldn't be won. The house would never be perfectly clean, so she focused on keeping it functional. The boys would always track in dirt, so she put down rugs that could be shaken out. The cooking got easier as she learned the stove's moods. Matthew attached himself to her like a burr, following her around and chattering constantly. She learned that his favorite color was blue, that he was terrified of thunderstorms, and that he missed his mother with an ache that sometimes made him cry at night when he thought no one could hear. Ben was quieter, but warmer. He'd help with chores without being asked, and he loved it when she read to them in the evenings. He was smart, too, picked up reading faster than his schoolwork suggested he should. Clara suspected he'd been playing dumb to avoid his father's attention, though she couldn't figure out why. Wyatt remained hostile. He spoke to her only when absolutely necessary, and never more than a few words. But Clara noticed things. She noticed that he always took the smallest portion at dinner, leaving more for his brothers. She noticed that he'd fixed the sagging porch step without being asked. She noticed the way he watched his father when Caleb wasn't looking, worried, protective. One evening, about a month after Clara's arrival, she was cleaning up after dinner when she heard raised voices from the barn. She looked out the window and saw Caleb and Wyatt standing in the doorway, clearly arguing about something. Not a child, Wyatt's voice carried across the yard. Then stop acting like one, Caleb shot back. Clara couldn't make out the rest, but she saw Wyatt storm off toward the fields. Caleb stood there for a moment, then kicked at the dirt and went back into the barn. Ben and Matthew had gone quiet at the table. What was that about? Clara asked. Wyatt wants to quit school, Ben said. Pa won't let him. Why does he want to quit? Matthew shrugged. He says it's stupid. Says he's not going to be anything but a rancher anyway, so what's the point? Clara finished the dishes, then grabbed a shawl and headed outside. She found Wyatt sitting on a fence rail at the far end of the pasture, throwing rocks at a can he'd set up as a target. "Your father sent you to drag me back?" he asked without turning around. "Your father doesn't know I'm out here." Clara climbed up to sit on the fence rail next to him. "Just seemed like you could use some company." "I don't need company. I need everyone to leave me alone. Can't always get what we need." Wyatt threw another rock. It pinged off the can. "You sound like my ma. She must have been smart. She was dying and she still tried to make me do my schoolwork, called it planning for the future." His voice was bitter. "What future? This is it. This ranch, these stupid cows, this endless nothing." Clara was quiet for a moment. "You really think ranching is your only option? What else is there? I'm not smart like Ben. Can't do figures in my head or read books for fun. I'm good at ranch work. That's it." "Being good at ranch work doesn't mean that's all you can do." Wyatt finally looked at her. In the fading light, she could see how young he still was beneath the anger. "What would you know about it? You ran away from one bad situation and landed in another? You're stuck here same as me." The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong, but Clara didn't flinch. "Maybe I am stuck," she said. "But at least I chose it, and when I'm ready to leave, I will. That's more than you can say. I can leave any time I want." "Can you? Where would you go? What would you do?" Clara kept her voice gentle. "I'm not trying to fight with you, Wyatt. I'm just saying, finishing school gives you choices. More choices than you'd have without it. My pa needs me here. Ranch work doesn't stop just because I'm in a classroom. Your father managed before. He'll manage again." Wyatt threw another rock, harder this time. It sailed past the can entirely. "He brought you here to replace my ma." There it was, the real issue. "No," Clara said firmly. "He brought me here because 3 boys needed someone to cook for them, and he was tired of burning everything. That's all. He looks at you the way he used to look at her." Clara's heart skipped. "No, he doesn't." "Yeah, he does. Not all the time, but sometimes. And you look back." "Wyatt, I'm not stupid." He jumped down from the fence. "You can pretend all you want that this is just about cooking and cleaning. But everyone changes. Everything changes. And I'm tired of pretending it doesn't hurt." He walked away before Clara could respond, disappearing into the gathering darkness. She sat on the fence for a while longer, thinking about what he'd said. Did Caleb look at her differently? She didn't think so. Their interactions were polite, practical. He thanked her for dinner. She asked about ranch business. They coordinated schedules. That was all. Except there was that moment last week when she'd burned her hand on the stove and he'd held it under the pump, his fingers gentle on her wrist. The way he'd asked if she was all right, his voice soft with concern. Except the way he'd started coming back to the house for lunch sometimes, even though it meant extra time away from work. Except the way her stomach flipped when she heard his boots on the porch. The way she'd started putting on her better dress for dinner, even though there was no reason to. Clara climbed down from the fence. This was dangerous thinking. She was here because she had nowhere else to go, because Caleb had been kind enough to give her an option besides destitution. Reading anything more into it was foolish. Still. As she walked back toward the house where lamplight glowed warm in the windows, she couldn't help thinking that Wyatt might not be entirely wrong. The summer heat broke in late September with a storm that lasted 3 days. Rain pounded the roof and turned the yard into a mud pit. The boys were trapped inside, restless and bickering constantly. On the second day, Clara was ready to lock them all in the barn. "Matthew, stop humming that song. Ben, get your feet off the table. Wyatt, if you slam one more door, I swear." "What?" Wyatt challenged. "What are you going to do?" Clara counted to 10 in her head. "I'm going to ask you nicely to stop acting like a toddler having a tantrum. You're not my mother. You can't tell me what to do. No, I'm not your mother, but I live here too, and I'd appreciate some basic courtesy." "Basic courtesy," Wyatt mocked. "You sound like a school teacher. Better than sounding like a spoiled brat." The room went silent. Even Matthew stopped humming. Wyatt's face flushed dark red. "What did you call me?" "You heard me?" Clara stood her ground. "You're 14 years old, Wyatt, old enough to know better. Your brothers look up to you, and you're acting like... Like what? Like I hate having a stranger in my house? Like I'm sick of everyone pretending everything's fine when it's not. Nobody's pretending. Yes, you are. You waltz in here and cook some food and read some stories, and everyone acts like you're saving us. But you're just here because you had nowhere else to go. You're using us same as we're using you. The truth of it hit harder than Clara expected. She opened her mouth to respond, but Caleb's voice cut through from the doorway. That's enough. Nobody had heard him come in. He stood dripping wet, having apparently just come from the barn. She started it, Wyatt muttered. I don't care who started it. I'm ending it. Caleb's voice was hard. Wyatt, apologize. For what? For telling the truth? For being cruel. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, and you know it. Father and son stared at each other. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Finally, Wyatt looked away. Sorry, he mumbled in Clara's general direction. Wyatt, I said I'm sorry. He pushed past Caleb and thundered up the stairs. A moment later, his door slammed hard enough to shake the house. Caleb sighed. Ben, Matthew, go upstairs. Do your schoolwork or read or something. Just give us a minute. The boys fled. Clara busied herself wiping down the already clean counter, not trusting herself to speak. He doesn't mean it, Caleb said quietly. Yes, he does. Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. And he's not wrong. I am using you. This arrangement benefits me just as much as it benefits you. That's not... Caleb stopped, running a hand through his wet hair. That's not what I meant when I brought you here. Isn't it? You needed help. I needed a place to go. It's a fair trade. Nothing about what happened in Red Hollow was fair. Clara finally looked at him. Maybe not. But I'm tired of pretending I'm some kind of charity case you rescued out of the goodness of your heart. You made a practical decision. So did I. Let's just call it what it is. And what is it? A business arrangement. I work, you provide food and shelter. That's all. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Disappointment, maybe. But he nodded. If that's how you want it. It's what makes sense. Fine. He turned toward the stairs, then paused. For what it's worth, Clara, I don't think of you as a business arrangement, but if that's easier for you, I'll respect it. He left her standing in the kitchen, the rain drumming against the windows, feeling like she'd just made a terrible mistake, but not knowing how to fix it. The distance between Clara and Caleb after that conversation felt like a canyon neither of them knew how to cross. They were polite, careful, professional. He thanked her for meals. She nodded and cleared dishes. The warmth that had been building between them, so gradual Clara had barely noticed it happening, disappeared overnight. October arrived with frost on the ground and a bite in the wind that promised a hard winter ahead. Clara threw herself into preparing the house, caulking windows, checking the roof for leaks, making sure they had enough firewood stacked. Physical work kept her mind occupied. Wyatt still avoided her, but the hostility had faded into something more like uncomfortable coexistence. Ben tried to bridge the gap, chattering about school and his friends, trying to fill the silences that stretched through dinner. Matthew had stopped asking Clara to read stories at night, sensing somehow that things had shifted. It was Ben who finally broke through the tension, though not in any way Clara expected. She was in the kitchen one afternoon, working on the ranch accounts Caleb had reluctantly handed over after she'd noticed several calculation errors. The numbers weren't adding up the way they should, expenses were higher than they needed to be, and some of the prices they were getting for cattle seemed low. Ben wandered in, dropped his school bag on the table, and peered over her shoulder. What are you doing? Trying to figure out why your father's losing money. Clara tapped the ledger with her pencil. These prices from the buyer in Cheyenne. Does that seem right to you? Ben squinted at the numbers. We always sell to Mr. Harrison. Pa says he's fair. Fair doesn't mean good. Clara pulled out another ledger, one she'd found in a box in the barn, dated from 2 years earlier. Look, 2 years ago the price per head was almost 20% higher. What changed? Ma died, Ben said quietly. That's when everything changed. Clara looked up at him. Your father mentioned she handled the books. Yeah, she was good with numbers, real good. Used to argue with the buyers all the time. Ben smiled slightly at the memory. Pa would get embarrassed, said it wasn't proper for a woman to haggle like that. But Ma didn't care. She said if they were going to treat her like she didn't know anything, she'd prove them wrong. Smart woman. The smartest. Ben's smile faded. After she died, Pa he accepted whatever they offered. I think he was too tired to fight. Clara studied the numbers again, her mind working. What if we didn't sell to Harrison? What if we found other buyers, compared prices? Pa won't like that. He says Harrison's reliable. Reliable at underpaying, apparently. Clara closed the ledger. I need to talk to your father. That conversation didn't go well. You want to do what? Caleb stared at her across the dinner table, fork suspended halfway to his mouth. I want to contact other buyers, compare prices, maybe even take a trip to Cheyenne myself and see what the market actually looks like. Clara, I appreciate you looking at the books, but what? You're losing money, Caleb, good money. Harrison's been taking advantage of you for 2 years. He's been fair. He's been convenient. There's a difference. Clara pulled out the ledger she'd brought with her. Look at these numbers. Your wife was getting 20, sometimes 25% more per head than you're getting now. And it's not because the market crashed. I checked the newspaper prices. The market's steady. Caleb's jaw tightened. Beth was good at negotiating. So teach me, or let me figure it out. Clara leaned forward. You're working yourself half to death on this ranch, and you're not even getting fair value for it. That's not sustainable. This is ranching. It's never sustainable. It was when your wife was alive. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb set down his fork carefully. I know you mean well, he said, his voice tight, but I've been running this ranch for 15 years. I think I know how to manage my own business. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're drowning and too stubborn to grab the rope. Maybe I didn't ask for the rope. Clara sat back, stung. Fine. Keep losing money. What do I care? It's your ranch. She stood and started clearing dishes with more force than necessary. Behind her, Caleb pushed back from the table. That came out wrong, he said. Did it? Clara, forget it. She dumped plates in the sink with a clatter. You made it clear this is a business arrangement. I overstepped. Won't happen again. She heard him sigh, heard his boots cross the floor toward her. When he spoke again, his voice was closer, quieter. I'm not good at this. At what? At letting people help. At admitting when I'm in over my head. He paused. Beth used to say I'd rather drown than ask for a life preserver. Clara didn't turn around. Sounds like she knew you pretty well. Yeah, she did. Another pause. The truth is, you're right. I know you're right. Harrison's been lowballing me for 2 years and I've been too damn tired to care. But the thought of changing how we do things, of fighting with buyers and haggling and... He broke off. It exhausts me just thinking about it. Clara finally turned to face him. So let me do it. You don't know anything about selling cattle. I didn't know anything about fixing fences either. I learned. She dried her hands on her apron. Give me a chance, Caleb. Let me try. He studied her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you're not going to Cheyenne alone. I'll go with you. 2 days later, they left before dawn, leaving the boys in the care of Tom Crawford, a ranch hand Caleb trusted. The ride to Cheyenne took most of the day, the wagon loaded with ledgers and samples of their cattle records. They barely spoke during the journey. Clara watched the landscape roll past, endless prairie giving way to more settled country, small farms and ranches scattered across the hills. The closer they got to Cheyenne, the more nervous she became. What did she really know about cattle prices? About negotiating with men who'd been in this business their whole lives? She was a 19-year-old girl whose main qualification was being good at arithmetic and too stubborn to quit. You're thinking too loud, Caleb said. Clara glanced at him. What? I can practically hear your thoughts from here. You're doubting yourself. Maybe I should be. Probably, but you're doing it anyway, which is the important part. He kept his eyes on the road. Beth used to get nervous before negotiations, too. She'd spend the whole ride there convinced she was going to fail. Then she'd walk into those meetings and turn into someone else entirely. Fierce. Unshakable. I'm not your wife. No, you're not. But you've got the same steel in your spine. I've seen it. He glanced at her. You stared down your own father in the middle of Red Hollow. You came to a stranger's ranch and made it work when you had every reason to run. You argue with me about fence posts and cattle prices even though I could tell you to shut up and you'd have nowhere else to go. That takes guts, Clara. She didn't know what to say to that. The words settled around her heart like a warm blanket. Thank you, she said finally. Don't thank me, just prove me right. Cheyenne was bigger than Red Hollow by a magnitude that made Clara's head spin. Actual streets, multiple hotels, shops selling things she'd only seen in catalogs. They found a boarding house that looked respectable and took 2 rooms for the night. The next morning, Clara dressed in her best outfit, which wasn't saying much, but at least it was clean and mended properly. She twisted her hair into a severe bun and practiced her most intimidating expression in the mirror. You look like you're about to go into battle, Caleb said when she met him downstairs. Isn't that what this is? Suppose so. Their first meeting was with a buyer named Marcus Webb, who operated out of a small office near the stockyards. He was a thin man with a suspicious mustache and eyes that calculated everything. Mr. Mercer, Webb said, barely glancing at Clara. What can I do for you? We're looking to discuss prices for our fall cattle, Caleb said. I don't typically work with small operators. How many head are we talking? 200 this fall, possibly more in spring. Webb's eyebrows rose slightly. That's not insignificant. What are you getting from your current buyer? Clara spoke up before Caleb could answer. We'd prefer to hear your offer first, Mr. Webb. That way we can evaluate fairly. Webb's eyes finally landed on her. And you are? Clara Whitmore. I manage the Mercer Ranch accounts. I see. His tone suggested he didn't see it all, or didn't approve. Well, Miss Whitmore, I'd need to see the quality of the livestock before making any offer. Of course. We have documentation here, weights, breeds, health records. Clara pulled out the ledgers and spread them on his desk with practiced efficiency. Webb flipped through them, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he named a figure. It was lower than Harrison's price. That seems conservative, Clara said carefully. It's the market rate. Is it? Because I've been reviewing the newspaper reports, and the average price in Cheyenne last month was 15% higher than what you just offered. Webb's mustache twitched. Newspaper reports aren't always accurate. Are you saying the Cheyenne Business Journal publishes false information? I'm saying there's a difference between average prices and what small ranches can expect. Why should there be a difference, cattle or cattle? Quality varies. Our quality is documented right there in front of you, unless you're suggesting the records are falsified. The meeting went downhill from there. Webb became defensive, Clara became more aggressive, and they left without a deal but with valuable information about what the market would actually bear. That was brutal, Caleb said when they were back on the street. Was I too harsh? You called him a thief to his face. I called him a shrewd businessman operating on thin margins. That's different. Caleb laughed. Actually laughed. The first time she'd heard that sound in weeks. Beth would have liked you. The words caught Clara off guard. She looked at him, but he was already walking toward their next appointment. They met with 4 more buyers that day. Each meeting followed a similar pattern. Initial dismissiveness when they saw Clara, growing respect as she demonstrated she knew the numbers, eventual offers that were all higher than what Harrison had been paying. By evening, Clara's head was spinning with figures and terms and negotiating strategies. They ate dinner at a small restaurant, both too tired to talk much. So what's the verdict? Caleb asked finally, pushing his half-eaten steak around his plate. Clara pulled out the notes she'd been compiling. Webb's offer was insulting. Carter seemed honest, but his operation is small. I don't think he could handle our full volume. Morrison was promising, but wants an exclusive contract, which locks us in. And Thompson. She paused. Thompson's offer was the best, 23% higher than Harrison, and he'll take our full volume without exclusivity. What's the catch? He wants to see the cattle before finalizing. He's willing to ride out to the ranch next week. Caleb nodded slowly. That's fair. It is, but it also means we need to make sure the cattle look their best, which means work, a lot of work. When isn't it work? But Caleb was smiling slightly. You did good today, Clara. Really good. The praise warmed her more than it should have. We're not done yet. Still have to close the deal. We will. He met her eyes across the table. I trust you. Something shifted in that moment, some wall that had been between them since their argument cracking just slightly. Clara felt it in her chest, a loosening she hadn't known she needed. They rode back the next day in better spirits than they'd left. Clara spent the journey calculating how much extra money the new deal would bring in, what it could mean for the ranch. New equipment, repairs that had been put off, maybe even hiring another hand to ease Caleb's workload. "You're doing it again," Caleb said. "Doing what?" Thinking so loud I can hear it. Clara smiled despite herself. "Just planning." Dangerous habit, planning. Life has a way of messing up plans. Then you adapt and plan again. Is that what you're doing? Adapting? The question felt heavier than it should have. Clara considered her answer carefully. "I suppose I am. This wasn't—" She gestured vaguely. "When I left Red Hollow, I didn't think much past getting away. I certainly didn't plan on caring about whether a ranch turned a profit, or whether 3 boys were eating properly, or—" She trailed off. "Or what?" "Or anything, really. I was just surviving, but now I'm living," Caleb offered quietly. "Maybe, or at least trying to." They were quiet for a while after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Comfortable, almost. When they got back to the ranch, the boys rushed out to meet them. Even Wyatt, though he tried to hide his relief behind a mask of teenage indifference. "Did you get the deal?" Ben asked excitedly. "Not yet," Clara said, climbing down from the wagon. "But we're close." "Close enough," Caleb added. Clara impressed some very skeptical businessmen with her negotiating skills. "Really?" Matthew's eyes went wide. "What did you do? Did you yell at them?" "I didn't yell. I simply pointed out facts they were choosing to ignore." "She called one of them a thief," Caleb said, grinning. "You said I didn't." "I said you called him a shrewd businessman. My interpretation might have been colored by your tone." The boys laughed, and even Wyatt's mouth twitched like he was fighting a smile. That night, after dinner and chores and the usual chaos of getting 3 boys settled for bed, Clara stood on the porch watching the stars emerge. The air had a sharp edge to it, promising frost by morning. The door opened behind her. Caleb stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one without a word. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her hands around the warmth. They stood in silence, sipping coffee and watching the night settle over the prairie. "I owe you an apology," Caleb said eventually. "For what?" "For what I said before. About not asking for help. About this being just a business arrangement." He stared into his coffee cup. "The truth is, I was scared." Clara waited, letting him find the words. "When Beth died, I shut down. Had to, just to keep moving forward. The boys needed me, the ranch needed me, and if I stopped long enough to feel what I was feeling, I'd have collapsed under it. So I just stopped feeling, stopped letting people in. Became this thing that worked and ate and slept and nothing else." He finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. "Then you showed up, and suddenly the house smelled like food again. The boys were laughing, things were getting fixed, and I was feeling things I thought were dead, and it terrified me. So I tried to put distance between us, tried to make it just about work, just business, safer that way." Clara's heart was beating too fast. "And now?" "Now I think maybe safe isn't what I need." He set down his coffee cup. "I don't know what this is between us, Clara. I don't know where it's going or if it should go anywhere, but I know I don't want to keep pretending it's nothing." She should step back, should remind him that she was 19 and he was pushing 40, should point out that she'd been here less than 4 months, should acknowledge that this was complicated and messy and probably a terrible idea. Instead, she said, "I don't want to pretend either." Caleb let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. He didn't move closer, didn't try to touch her, just stood there, the space between them charged with possibility. "So what do we do?" he asked. "I don't know. Figure it out as we go." "That doesn't sound like you. You're a planner. Plans get messed up. You said so yourself." Clara smiled slightly. "Maybe we just see what happens." "All right." Caleb picked up his coffee again. "We'll see what happens." The next week passed in a blur of preparation for Thompson's visit. They sorted cattle, repaired fences, cleaned up the ranch yard. Clara worked on detailed records, making sure every piece of documentation was perfect. Thompson arrived on a Thursday, a tall man with calculating eyes and a firm handshake. He spent 2 days inspecting the cattle, asking pointed questions, reviewing every document Clara had prepared. On the second evening, he made his official offer. It was 25% higher than Harrison's price. Clara managed to keep her expression neutral as she reviewed the contract, checking every clause, every term. Only when she was satisfied did she look at Caleb. "It's fair," she said. Caleb signed. After Thompson left, Ben whooped loud enough to scare the chickens. Matthew danced around the kitchen. Even Wyatt cracked a genuine smile. "Does this mean we're rich?" Matthew asked. "It means we're solvent," Caleb said, but he was grinning. "And it means Clara just saved this ranch." "We saved it," Clara corrected. "All of us." That night, Caleb opened a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for special occasions. He poured a small measure for himself and Clara while the boys were upstairs. "To partnership," he said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," Clara countered. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm down Clara's throat. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said, setting down his glass. "Next week, I need to go into Red Hollow, ranch supplies, some business at the bank. And I think you should come with me." Clara's stomach dropped. "I don't want to go back there." "I know, but hiding from it doesn't make it go away." His voice was gentle. "They're going to talk. They probably already are. Better to face it head on. Let them see you're doing fine. That you're more than what your father tried to make you." "I don't care what they think." "Don't you?" Clara wanted to say no. Wanted to claim complete indifference to the opinions of the people who'd watched her father try to trade her for a horse and done nothing. But the truth was more complicated. "I hate that I care," she admitted. "I hate that some part of me still wants their approval, even after everything." "That's human. That's normal." Caleb reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "You don't have to face them alone, though. I'll be right there." Clara looked at his hand, so close to hers. She could close the distance easily, just a few inches. She didn't. Not yet. "All right," she said. "I'll go." Red Hollow looked exactly the same as it had 4 months ago, which somehow made everything worse. The same dusty streets, the same tired buildings, the same people who'd stood by and watched her humiliation. Clara sat beside Caleb on the wagon seat, her spine rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. She'd worn her best dress, had done her hair carefully, had armored herself in respectability as best she could. It wasn't enough. She still felt naked under their stares. They started at the bank, where Caleb had business with the manager. Clara waited outside, feeling eyes on her from across the street. Mrs. Henderson stood in front of her general store, watching. Old Pete from the livery had stopped working to stare. Sarah Cunningham, former friend, quickly looked away when Clara met her gaze. "Clara Whitmore?" A woman's voice, sharp with disbelief. Clara turned to find herself face to face with Margaret Wilson, the mayor's wife, and the undisputed queen of Red Hollow society. "Mrs. Wilson," Clara said, keeping her voice level. Margaret looked her up and down, taking in the good dress, the neat hair, the fact that Clara didn't look beaten down or desperate or ruined. "I heard you'd gone to live with Caleb Mercer," Margaret said, her tone dripping with implication. "I help run his ranch." "I see. How resourceful of you." The word was poisoned. Clara felt the old shame trying to claw its way up her throat, the impulse to shrink, to apologize for existing. But she didn't. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked Margaret Wilson directly in the eye. "It's honest work, Mrs. Wilson. More honest than some things people do in this town." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Careful, girl. People talk. And what they're saying about you and Caleb Mercer, they can say whatever they want." Clara cut her off. "They always do. The difference is, I stopped listening." Caleb emerged from the bank at that moment, stopping short when he saw the confrontation. His expression hardened. "Mrs. Wilson," he said coolly. "Mr. Mercer." Margaret's tone changed, became more careful. "I was just telling Miss Whitmore how surprised we all were by your arrangement." "Were you?" Caleb moved to stand beside Clara, close enough that his arm brushed hers. "I can't imagine why. I needed help. Clara needed a place. Seemed straightforward to me." "Of course, though you can understand how it might appear to others." "I don't particularly care how it appears." Caleb's voice carried across the street, loud enough for anyone listening to hear clearly. "Clara runs my ranch accounts better than I ever did. She manages my household, helps raise my boys, and works harder than half the men in this county. What exactly is it about that arrangement that troubles you, Margaret? Margaret's face flushed. I simply meant, you simply meant to imply something improper. Let me be clear. Clara Whitmore has brought nothing but competence, dignity, and strength to my family. The only improper thing that happened was her own father trying to trade her like livestock, while this whole town watched and did nothing. So if there's gossip, maybe direct it at the people who stood by and let that happen. The street had gone quiet. Clara could feel dozens of eyes on them now, witnesses to this very public defense. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, then turned on her heel and walked away without another word. Clara's hands were shaking. Caleb noticed and gently took her elbow. Come on, he said quietly. Let's get what we need and go home. Home. He'd called the ranch home, as if she belonged there. Maybe she did. They finished their business quickly. Supplies from the general store, where Mrs. Henderson served them in tight-lipped silence. A few other errands around town. People stared, whispered, but no one else confronted them directly. As they were loading the wagon, Clara saw her father. He was stumbling out of Murphy's saloon, thinner than she remembered, his clothes filthier. He saw her and stopped, swaying slightly. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the dusty street. Then Thomas Whitmore spat in the dirt and went back inside. Clara felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no regret. Just a distant sort of pity for a man who'd thrown away everything that mattered for bottles of cheap whiskey. You all right? Caleb asked. Yeah, Clara said and meant it. I am. They rode out of Red Hollow as the sun began its descent. Clara didn't look back. On the road north, Caleb finally spoke. What I said back there about you and the ranch, I meant it. I know. I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need you to understand something. He pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. You're not just help, Clara. You're not just an arrangement. You've become... He struggled, searching for the right words. Clara waited, her heart in her throat. You've become essential, he said finally. To the ranch, to the boys, to me. And I know this is complicated. I know people will talk and judge and make it harder than it needs to be, but I'm tired of pretending that what I feel for you is simple gratitude or professional respect or whatever the hell I'm supposed to feel. What do you feel? Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. Caleb looked at her with those storm gray eyes, and Clara saw everything he was afraid to say out loud. I'd like to court you, he said. Properly. If you'll let me. Clara thought about everything that had led to this moment. Her father's betrayal, the wagon ride north, the hard months of work, the boys, the ranch, the slow building of something she hadn't let herself name. She thought about Margaret Wilson's poisoned implications and the gossip that would follow them. About the age difference, the complicated situation, all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then she thought about Caleb defending her in the middle of Red Hollow, about his hand almost touching hers across the kitchen table, about the way he'd called the ranch home like she was part of that definition. Yes, she said. I'll let you. Caleb's smile started slow, then spread across his face like sunrise. He didn't kiss her. That would come later. For now, he just took her hand in his, calloused palm against calloused palm, and they sat together on the wagon seat as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson. Behind them, Red Hollow disappeared into the prairie dust. Ahead, the ranch waited, and whatever future they'd build together, one day at a time. The boys noticed the change before anyone said a word. Clara caught them whispering in the barn 3 days after the trip to Red Hollow, their voices low and conspiratorial. She'd gone out to collect eggs and found Matthew perched on a hay bale while Ben and Wyatt stood nearby. I'm telling you, something's different, Ben was saying. Pa smiled at breakfast. Actually smiled. So what? People smile. Wyatt's tone was dismissive, but Clara could hear the edge underneath. Not Pa. Not like that. And he keeps looking at Clara all weird. Clara's cheeks heated. She should announce herself, let them know she was there. Instead, she stayed quiet, listening. Maybe he's just happy about the Thompson deal, Matthew offered hopefully. More money means less worry, right? It's not about money. Wyatt's voice had gone flat. It's about her. You don't know that, Ben said. I know Pa. I know how he gets. A pause. He's going to marry her. The words hung in the cold barn air. Clara's hand tightened on the egg basket. You think? Matthew sounded more curious than upset. I know. Just wait. Before spring, he'll ask her. Wyatt kicked at a loose board, and everything changes again. Clara backed away quietly before they could discover her eavesdropping. She walked back to the house with her basket of eggs, Wyatt's prediction echoing in her head. Marriage. She and Caleb hadn't talked about marriage. They'd barely talked about courting beyond that one conversation on the wagon. The last week had been a careful dance, stolen glances across the dinner table, his hand brushing hers when he passed her the coffee pot, moments of closeness that neither of them quite knew what to do with. But marriage? That felt impossibly far away and terrifyingly close all at once. Inside, she found Caleb at the kitchen table, working on ranch plans for the winter. He looked up when she entered, and there it was. That smile Ben had noticed, softer than his usual expression, reaching his eyes. Good haul? He asked, nodding at the eggs. Decent. Clara set the basket down, suddenly self-conscious. The boys are in the barn. I know. Told them to muck out the stalls. He set down his pencil. You all right? You look worried. I'm fine. Just thinking. About? About your son speculating about our future. About how complicated this is. About whether I'm ready for any of it. About winter, she said instead. We'll need more firewood than what's stacked. And the roof over the back bedroom. I think it's leaking. When it rains again, we should check. Caleb nodded, accepting the deflection. I'll get Tom to help me with the firewood next week. As for the roof, I've been putting that off too long. Probably needs more than a patch. They fell into discussing practical matters. Supplies needed, repairs scheduled, the never-ending list of things that kept a ranch running. Safe territory, easy territory. But underneath it all, Clara felt the weight of unspoken questions. That Sunday, Caleb asked if she wanted to ride out with him to check the northern fence line. The boys were occupied with their own chores, and the afternoon stretched ahead with unusual freedom. They rode in comfortable silence at first, the horses picking their way across familiar ground. The November sun was weak but pleasant, and the wind had died down to almost nothing. I've been thinking about what I said, Caleb started after a while. About courting you properly. Clara's stomach flipped. And I realized I don't actually know what that means anymore. He sounded almost embarrassed. I courted Beth 20 years ago, and even then I did it badly. Stepped on her feet at a dance, brought her flowers she was allergic to, nearly got us both kicked out of a restaurant because I argued with the waiter. Despite her nerves, Clara smiled. Sounds romantic. It was a disaster. But she married me anyway, probably out of pity. He paused. What I'm trying to say is, I'm going to be terrible at this, but I want to try. If you'll be patient with me. I don't need grand gestures, Caleb. What do you need? The question was sincere, genuinely curious. Clara thought about it as they rode, watching the prairie roll by. Honesty, she said finally. I need to know where I stand, what you're thinking. I've spent too much of my life guessing, trying to read people who wouldn't just tell me the truth. That's fair. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, honestly, I'm scared out of my mind right now. Clara looked at him in surprise. Of what? Of messing this up. Of the boys hating it. Of people in town making your life harder than it already is. He met her eyes. Of you realizing you could do better than a broke rancher with 3 kids and more problems than solutions. You're not broke anymore. Thompson's paying fair. You know what I mean. I do. And I'm scared too. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. I'm 19, Caleb. I've never been courted by anyone. I don't know what I'm doing either. And yes, people are going to talk. They already are. Margaret Wilson probably has half of Red Hollow convinced I'm some kind of... She stopped, not wanting to say the word. Some kind of what? Caleb's voice had gone hard. You know what they'll say. Young girl, older man, living under the same roof. It doesn't matter that we've been completely proper. They'll make it dirty anyway. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll call. She broke off again. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop. Clara did the same. They'll call you what? He asked quietly. Say it. A whore, Clara said bluntly. Or near enough. A gold digger. A girl who traded her father's house for a better offer. Anyone who says that to your face will answer to me. You can't fight the whole town, Caleb. Watch me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something warm bloom in Clara's chest. "I mean it, Clara. I won't let anyone treat you like that." "You already did," she reminded him gently. "In Red Hollow, with Margaret Wilson. You defended me in front of everyone. And I'll do it again as many times as it takes." They sat on their horses, facing each other in the middle of nowhere, and Clara felt the truth settle into her bones. This wasn't just attraction or convenience or gratitude. Whatever was growing between them ran deeper. "The boys know," she said. "Or at least they suspect." Caleb didn't look surprised. "Wyatt? All of them? I overheard them talking in the barn this morning. Wyatt thinks you're going to marry me before spring." "Does he now?" Caleb's expression was unreadable. "He's not happy about it." "Wyatt's not happy about much these days." Caleb sighed. "But he'll adjust. They all will. They like you, Clara. Even Wyatt, though he'd rather die than admit it. Liking me as the housekeeper is different from accepting me as—" She faltered over the word. "As my wife?" Caleb finished. The word hung between them. Wife. Clara turned it over in her mind, testing how it felt. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "Eventually, I mean?" "Eventually, yes." Caleb held her gaze. "But there's no rush. We've got time to figure this out. Let people get used to the idea. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you, right?" "Right," Clara agreed, though part of her wondered if time would make things easier or just give everyone more opportunity to complicate them. They rode on to check the fence, which turned out to be fine. On the way back, Caleb told her stories about the ranch, about when he and Beth had first bought it, young and stupid and convinced they could make it work through sheer determination. "We almost lost it twice in the first 5 years," he admitted. "Drought one year, cattle disease the next. Beth wanted to give up, move back east where her family was, but I was too stubborn, convinced her to try one more season. And it worked? Barely. We scraped by, made enough to survive another year. Then another. Before we knew it, 10 years had passed, and we were still here." He smiled slightly. "Beth used to say the ranch was like a terrible addiction we couldn't quit." "Did she ever regret staying?" Caleb thought about it. "Some days, yeah, when the wind was howling and the snow was piling up and one of the boys had croup and the money was running out. Those days, I'd see it in her eyes. The wondering about what life might have been like if we'd made different choices." He paused. "But she always said the regret was worth it for the good days. The days when everything clicked, when the ranch felt like home instead of a prison." Clara understood that. The ranch was exhausting, relentless, unforgiving, but it was also becoming hers in a way nothing else ever had. Her work, her choices, her place in the world. When they got back, the boys had finished their chores and were kicking a ball around the yard. Duke chased after them, barking enthusiastically. "Pa!" Matthew called. "Clara, come play." "I've got work," Caleb started. "Come on," Clara interrupted, surprising herself. "Work can wait 10 minutes." They played until the sun started setting, a chaotic game with rules that changed every few minutes. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd done something purely for fun, with no purpose beyond the moment itself. Watching Caleb laugh as Matthew accidentally kicked the ball into the water trough, seeing even Wyatt crack a grudging smile when Ben tripped over his own feet, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Something like belonging. That night, after the boys were in bed, she and Caleb sat on the porch despite the cold. He'd brought out blankets and coffee, and they wrapped up against the November chill. "This is nice," Clara said quietly. "Yeah, it is." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then, "I want to give you something." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Clara's heart jumped. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, seeing her expression. "It's just, open it." Inside was a simple silver ring, delicate and worn. "It was Beth's," Caleb said. "Not her wedding ring. That's put away for the boys. This was something she wore every day, just a little thing her grandmother gave her. After she died, I couldn't look at it. Kept it in a drawer for 3 years. Clara didn't touch it. Wasn't sure she should. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Caleb continued. "Not yet. But I want you to have this. As a promise, I guess. That what we're building here, it's real. It matters. And when we're both ready, when the time is right, I'm going to ask you properly." "Caleb, You don't have to wear it if you don't want to. I wanted you to know I'm serious about this. About us. Clara picked up the ring carefully, feeling the weight of it, the history. Beth's ring, his first wife's ring. Won't the boys? I already talked to them. This afternoon, before dinner. Told them I had feelings for you, that I was going to court you, and that eventually I hoped you'd agree to marry me. He smiled slightly. Wyatt stormed off. Ben asked if you'd still make pancakes, and Matthew wanted to know if that made you our new ma. What did you tell him? That nobody could replace their mother, but that you were becoming part of our family anyway, in your own way, and that it was okay to care about you without forgetting Beth. Clara's eyes stung. She blinked hard, refusing to cry. So, Caleb asked gently, will you take it? Clara slipped the ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb reached over and took her left hand, the one without the ring, holding it between both of his. They sat like that as the stars came out, not talking, not needing to. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled up in drifts taller than Matthew. The wind cut through every crack in the house, no matter how much Clara stuffed the gaps with rags. They went through firewood faster than anticipated and had to ration to make it last. The cattle huddled together in the barn and the near pastures. The chickens stopped laying. The water pump froze twice, requiring Caleb to pour hot water down it to get it working again. Through it all, the ranch held together. Barely, some days, but it held. Clara and Caleb fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite its newness. He'd come in from morning chores and she'd have coffee ready. She'd work on the accounts while he repaired equipment. They'd trade off reading to the boys at night. She'd do one story, he'd do the next. Wyatt slowly thawed, though he'd probably never admit it. He started asking Clara's opinion on things, little questions about school or ranch work. Once, he even helped her carry in firewood without being asked. You're good for him, Ben told her one afternoon while they were working on his arithmetic homework. Wyatt, he's less angry. I think he's just getting older, Clara deflected. Nah, it's you, Ben grinned. He likes having someone to argue with who argues back. Ma used to do that. Never let him get away with sulking. The comparisons to Beth came up more often now from all the boys. At first it had made Clara uncomfortable, like she was being measured against a ghost. But she'd come to realize they weren't comparing, they were connecting, trying to weave her into the story of their family without erasing what came before. On Christmas Eve, Caleb surprised her. After the boys had gone to bed with stockings hung and anticipation buzzing, he led Clara out to the barn. What are we doing? She asked, confused. You'll see. In the barn, lit by a single lantern, stood the chestnut horse that had started everything. The one Thomas Whitmore had wanted so badly he'd been willing to trade his own daughter for it. His name is Cedar, Caleb said, and I want you to have him. Clara stared. What? He's yours, properly yours. I'm signing over the ownership papers tomorrow. Caleb moved to stroke the horse's neck. That day in Red Hollow, your father wanted this horse. Thought he was worth more than you. I want you to own him, Clara. Want you to ride him knowing he was never worth trading for. Nothing was. Clara's throat tightened. She walked over to Cedar, running her hand along his warm flank. The horse whickered softly. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept him. Caleb moved closer. Say you know your worth isn't measured by what anyone else thinks you deserve. I'm learning, Clara said. Some days I believe it more than others. That's all anyone can do. Keep learning, keep believing. He hesitated, then added, Beth used to say that healing isn't linear. Some days you backslide. That's normal. What matters is you keep moving forward more than you move back. Clara leaned against Cedar's solid warmth, letting the simple truth of the horse's existence ground her. She owned something. Not borrowed, not permitted to use, but actually owned. It was a small thing and everything all at once. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. They stood together in the barn, the horse between them, and Clara felt another piece of her old life fall away. The girl who'd stood outside Murphy's saloon, broken and ashamed, was fading. Someone new was taking her place. January brought a blizzard that lasted 4 days. They were trapped inside, the wind howling so loud they had to shout to be heard across the room. The boys went stir-crazy by day 2, fighting over everything and nothing. On day 3, Clara organized a tournament. Cards, checkers, anything to burn off energy. She and Caleb refereed while the boys competed with an intensity that would have been funny if it wasn't so desperate. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind still screamed outside, rattling the windows. She went downstairs to make tea and found Caleb already there, staring into the dying fire. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking too much." He poked at the embers, sending up sparks. "Worrying, really." "About what?" "About whether we have enough hay to last until spring, about whether the cattle are going to make it through this storm, about money and repairs and everything that could go wrong." He looked at her. "About whether I'm doing right by you." Clara sat down next to him. "What do you mean?" "You're 19, Clara. You should be going to dances, meeting people your own age, having fun. Instead, you're stuck on a failing ranch with a man old enough to be your father and 3 kids who aren't yours." "The ranch isn't failing. We made a profit last quarter, remember?" "You know what I mean?" Clara did. She'd thought about it herself, late at night when doubt crept in. The life she was building here was so different from what she'd imagined as a girl. No romance, no adventure, just hard work and harder winters and a future tied to land and cattle and responsibility. But when she really examined it, Clara realized she didn't want those other things. Not anymore. Maybe not ever, really. She'd wanted escape, wanted safety, wanted to matter. The ranch gave her all of that. "I'm not stuck," she said firmly. "I chose this. I keep choosing it every day." "You could still leave, go to a city, find work, meet someone my own age," Clara finished. "Someone without complications or children or a ranch hanging around his neck like a millstone." Caleb flinched. "When you put it like that, I'm putting it honestly. Yes, there are easier paths, but easier doesn't mean better." She took his hand, rough and calloused from ranch work. "I don't want easy, Caleb. I want this. The work, the boys, the ranch. You. Is it what I imagined when I was a little girl reading fairy tales? No, it's better because it's real. You might feel differently in 10 years. I might. So might you. That's the risk we take." Clara squeezed his hand. "But I'd rather risk it with you than play it safe somewhere else." Caleb pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that while the fire burned down to embers and the storm raged outside. "I love you," he said quietly. "I probably shouldn't say it yet, probably too soon, but there it is. I love you, Clara Whitmore." Clara's heart stuttered. She turned to look at him, searching his face in the dim firelight. "I love you too," she said, and meant it completely. He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, giving her room to pull away if she wanted. Clara didn't want. She kissed him back, tasting coffee and something that might have been hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little harder, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably talk to the boys," he said. "Soon. Make this official before the whole county hears about it through gossip." "Make what official?" "Our engagement. If you'll have me. I know it's fast. I know there's 100 reasons to wait, but..." "Yes," Clara interrupted. Caleb pulled back to look at her. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you, whenever you want, however you want." Clara smiled at his shocked expression. "What? Did you think I'd say no after that kiss? I thought you'd want time to think about it." "I've been thinking about it for months. So have you. So have the boys, apparently. Everyone knows this is where we're heading. Might as well make it official." Caleb laughed, the sound surprised and delighted. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Clara felt the last of her reservations burn away. They told the boys the next morning, after the storm had finally blown itself out and the world was buried under 3 feet of pristine snow. Matthew cheered. Ben grinned and asked when the wedding would be. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, walked over to Clara, and held out his hand. "Welcome to the family," he said gruffly. "Officially, I mean." Clara shook his hand, her eyes stinging with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she managed. Wyatt hesitated. "Just don't try to be Ma. Be yourself, that's enough." "I promise." He nodded and left the room quickly, probably embarrassed by the emotion. Ben and Matthew immediately started planning the wedding, suggesting ideas that ranged from practical to absurd. Clara caught Caleb's eye across the chaos and saw her own happiness reflected back at her. They decided on a simple wedding in early March at the ranch, with just a few witnesses from town. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw too much attention. Just Clara and Caleb and the promise they were making to build a life together. But before any of that could happen, Thomas Whitmore came back. Clara saw him first, riding up the lane on a horse that looked as worn out as he did. She was in the yard hanging laundry, and her first instinct was to run inside to get Caleb to hide. But she didn't. Instead, she set down the laundry basket and walked toward him, meeting him in the middle of the yard. Behind her, she heard the barn door open. Caleb, alerted by Duke's barking. Thomas dismounted clumsily, nearly falling. He looked terrible, thinner, dirtier, older than his years. The smell of whiskey hung around him like a cloud. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, "I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to talk about. Please, I need help. Money. I got debts, and the man I owe, he's gonna—" "No?" Clara's voice was steady, cold. "You don't understand. They'll kill me if I don't pay. I just need a little, just enough to—" I said no. Caleb had reached them now, standing slightly behind Clara, but close enough to intervene if needed. The boys had emerged from the barn too, watching. Thomas's eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to Clara. "You owe me. I'm your father." "You traded me for a horse," Clara said. Each word fell like a stone. "You stood outside a saloon and tried to sell me because you wanted a better horse to ride. What exactly do I owe you?" "I was drunk. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. You meant every word." Clara took a step closer. "You know what's funny? That trade was the best thing that ever happened to me. Coming here, building this life, finding people who actually value me, all of that happened because you thought I was worthless." Thomas's face twisted. "I never said—" "You didn't have to say it. You showed it every day of my life, when you drank away the food money, when you hit me for asking for things we needed, when you blamed me for my mother dying like a 12-year-old child somehow caused influenza. Your mother—" "Don't!" Clara's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare talk about her. She deserved better than you. I deserved better than you. And the fact that it took being traded like livestock for me to get it is on you, not me." Thomas swayed, his eyes wet. Clara couldn't tell if it was tears or just the effects of alcohol. "I got nowhere else to go," he said, his voice small. "That's not my problem." "Please, Clara, I'm your father. Blood matters." Clara looked at this man who'd given her life and then spent 19 years making her regret it. She felt Caleb's presence behind her, solid and supportive. Felt the boys watching, learning what it meant to set boundaries. Felt the ring on her finger, Beth's ring, the promise of a future she'd chosen. "Blood doesn't matter," she said. "Not when it's all you have. These people—" She gestured at Caleb and the boys. "They're my family. Not because we share blood, but because we chose each other. That's what makes it matter." "So that's it?" Thomas's voice turned ugly. "You're just gonna let me die? You're gonna die drunk in a ditch somewhere no matter what I do. We both know it. The only question is whether you drag me down with you." Clara's voice was surprisingly calm. "And I'm done being dragged down. I'm done carrying your weight. I'm done paying for your mistakes." She turned to Caleb. "Can you give him some food for the road? Maybe a little money. Not much, just enough to get him somewhere else." Caleb nodded and went to the house. Thomas stared at Clara like he'd never seen her before. "You've changed," he said. "No, you just never bothered to know who I was." Clara picked up her laundry basket. "Goodbye, Thomas. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, but you won't find it here." She walked back to the clothesline and continued hanging laundry, her hands only shaking slightly. She heard Caleb return, heard the brief exchange as he gave Thomas supplies, heard the sound of the horse riding away. Only when the hoofbeats had faded completely did Clara's knees buckle. She sat down hard in the dirt, the laundry forgotten, and let herself shake. Caleb was there in an instant, arms around her. The boys too, Matthew hugging her from one side, Ben from the other. Even Wyatt stood close, his hand on her shoulder. "I'm okay," Clara said, though tears were streaming down her face. "I'm okay." "You were amazing," Caleb said fiercely. "You hear me? Amazing." Clara leaned into him and let herself feel it all. The grief for what her father could have been, The relief that he was gone, the strange sense of completion that came from finally saying everything she'd needed to say. That night, after the boys were in bed, she and Caleb sat on the porch. Clara told him about her mother, about growing up with Thomas's anger and disappointment, about all the things she'd buried because there was never a safe place to say them. Caleb listened without interrupting, just held her hand and let her talk until the words ran out. "Thank you," Clara said finally, exhausted. "For what?" "For being here, for giving me a place where I could finally tell him no." "You didn't need me for that. That strength was all yours." "Maybe." But Clara knew it was easier to be strong when you had something worth being strong for. And she had that now. A ranch, a family, a future. She had home. The wedding happened on a Friday in March, when the prairie was just starting to remember what green looked like. Not the grand affair Clara had imagined as a girl, but something better, something real. They stood in front of the house with Judge Morrison from Sweetwater presiding, the boys lined up as witnesses. Tom Crawford was there, and a few neighboring ranchers Caleb had worked with over the years. No one from Red Hollow came, which suited Clara fine. She wore a dress she'd made herself from fabric Caleb had bought in Cheyenne, simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. No veil, no flowers, no fuss. Just her hand in Caleb's and the words that would bind them together. "I do," she said when the judge asked. "I do," Caleb echoed, and slipped a plain gold band onto her finger next to Beth's ring. They kissed while the boys whooped and Duke barked and the prairie wind carried it all away into the endless Wyoming sky. The celebration afterward was equally simple. A meal Clara and Caleb had prepared together, some whiskey passed around, stories traded on the porch as the sun set. Nothing fancy, nothing that would generate gossip or give people ammunition. "You look happy," Tom Crawford said to Clara as he was leaving. "Really happy." "I am," Clara said, and meant it. That night, after everyone had gone and the boys were asleep, Clara and Caleb sat together in the room that was now officially theirs. Not Caleb's room, not a space she was borrowing, theirs. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked. Clara thought about it honestly. "Ask me again in 5 years when I'm exhausted and covered in dust and wondering why I chose a life this hard. That's not very romantic. It's realistic." She leaned against him. "But no regrets. You?" "None." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I reserve the right to complain when you reorganize my tools again. They were a mess. They were organized by how I use them. That's not a system, that's chaos." They bickered comfortably until sleep pulled them under, and Clara thought this might be what happiness actually looked like. Not perfect moments, but real ones. The kind you could build a life on. Spring brought work that never seemed to end. Fences to repair after winter damage, fields to prepare for planting, cattle to move to fresh pasture. The Thompson deal had brought in enough money to hire another hand, a quiet kid named Jesse who worked hard and asked few questions. Clara found her rhythm as Caleb's wife, though the title still felt strange sometimes. She was still doing most of the same work, cooking, cleaning, managing accounts. But now there was an official recognition of her place, a weight to her opinions when ranch decisions needed making. "What do you think?" Caleb would ask about breeding stock or equipment purchases, and he actually wanted to know. Not humoring her, not patronizing, but genuinely valuing her input. It was addictive, being taken seriously. The boys adjusted too, in their own ways. Matthew started calling her Ma naturally, without prompting, and Clara's heart squeezed every time. Ben was more reserved, still called her Clara, but he'd taken to leaving little drawings for her, sketches of the ranch, of horses, of family scenes that always included her. Wyatt remained complicated. He'd accepted the marriage, even defended it once when a ranch hand made a crude comment. But there was still distance there, still walls Clara wasn't sure how to cross. One afternoon in early May, she found him in the barn, struggling to repair a saddle that had seen better days. "Need help?" she asked. "I got it." Clara sat down anyway, picking up some of the leather working tools. "Your father mentioned you've been talking about going to veterinary school." Wyatt's hand stilled. "He told you about that?" "He did. Said you've been reading every book you can find about animal medicine." "It's stupid. We can't afford it anyway." "It's not stupid, and we might be able to afford it, actually. I've been working on the numbers." Clara kept her voice casual. The Thompson contract is solid, and if we have another good year, we could put some money aside. Not enough for a fancy Eastern school, but there's a program in Denver that might work. Wyatt looked at her suspiciously. Why would you do that? Help me leave, I mean. Because you're smart, and you have a dream, and someone should help you chase it. Clara met his eyes. I'm not trying to replace your mother, Wyatt. I never was. But I am part of this family now, and that means I care about what happens to you, all of you. You really think I could do it? Become a veterinarian? I think you could do anything you set your mind to. You're stubborn enough. That surprised a laugh out of him. Pa says the same thing. We're both right. Clara stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Think about it. Look into the programs. We'll figure out the rest. Wyatt nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Thank you. Clara. It was the first time he'd said her name like that. Not challenging, not reluctant, just honest. Summer was brutal that year. Heat that made work almost impossible, and drought that had everyone watching the sky for rain that didn't come. The cattle suffered, crops struggled, and tensions ran high. Clara watched Caleb push himself harder, working from before dawn until well after dark, trying to keep everything from falling apart. You're going to collapse, she told him one night when he came in looking half dead. Can't afford to collapse. Too much to do. You can't afford not to. If you break down, what happens to the ranch? To the boys? To us? Caleb slumped into a chair, exhaustion written across every line of his body. I don't know how to stop, Clara. Every time I pause, I think about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways I could fail you, fail the boys, lose everything we've built. Clara knelt beside him, taking his rough hands in hers. You're not doing this alone anymore, remember? That was the whole point. Let me carry some of it. You already carry half the ranch. Then let me carry more. Let the boys step up. Let Jesse take on extra. Stop acting like you're the only one who can hold this place together. It wasn't easy getting Caleb to delegate. Years of doing everything himself had made it instinct. But slowly, he learned to let go. Learned to trust that the work would get done even if he wasn't the one doing it. The drought broke in late July with storms that lasted 3 days. Rain pounded the parched earth, filling the water tanks and turning the creek into a rushing torrent. The boys danced in it, and Clara joined them, all of them soaked and laughing while Caleb watched from the porch with a smile that said he thought they were all crazy. Maybe they were. But it was the good kind of crazy, the kind that came from surviving hard things together. In August, a letter arrived from Red Hollow. Clara almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. It was from Sarah Cunningham, her childhood friend. Dear Clara, I know we haven't spoken since you left, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to write. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you, for letting my parents dictate who I could be friends with, for not standing up for you when that terrible thing happened. I heard you married Caleb Mercer. Margaret Wilson has said terrible things, but I want you to know not everyone believes her. Some of us remember the girl you were, and we're glad you found somewhere better. If you ever come back to Red Hollow, I'd like to see you, buy you coffee, and apologize properly. I understand if you'd rather not, but I wanted you to know the offer stands. Your old friend, Sarah. Clara read it twice, unsure how she felt. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to reject this olive branch from someone who'd abandoned her when she needed friends most. But another part remembered sitting with Sarah under the cottonwood tree by the creek, sharing secrets and dreams before everything fell apart. What do you think? She asked Caleb, showing him the letter. He read it carefully. I think people can change. Doesn't mean you owe her forgiveness, but if you want to give her a chance, I'll support that. I don't know what I want. Then wait until you do. She can wait a little longer after 3 years. Clara tucked the letter away in her dresser, unresolved. Some things didn't have easy answers. Fall brought the cattle sale, and this time Clara went to Cheyenne with Caleb and Thompson. She'd spent months preparing, learning every detail of their operation, understanding the market in ways that would have made Beth proud. The negotiation was fierce. Thompson was fair but shrewd, and Clara had to fight for every penny. But when they finally shook hands on the deal, the price was 30% higher than what Harrison had been paying. You're terrifying, Thompson told her with grudging respect. Remind me never to play poker with you. On the ride home, Caleb couldn't stop grinning. You know what this means? We can replace the barn roof, fix the irrigation system, maybe even get that breeding bull I've been eyeing. Or, Clara said carefully, We could put some aside for Wyatt's schooling and start a real savings account, something we don't touch except for emergencies. Caleb looked at her, then nodded slowly. You're right. That's smarter. We can do both, actually, if we're careful. Clara pulled out the calculation she'd been working on. The cattle sale covers immediate expenses plus improvements, but I've been doing some bookkeeping for the Morrison Ranch. They pay well, and it's work I can do from home. That money could go straight to savings and Wyatt's fund. When did you arrange that? Last month. Judge Morrison asked if I'd be interested when he was out here for the wedding. I didn't want to mention it until I knew I could handle it along with everything else. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. You're making your own money. Is that a problem? No, it's... He stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. It's smart, and I'm proud of you. But it also means you don't need to stay. You could save up, leave if you wanted to. Clara understood what he wasn't saying. The fear that she'd realized she had options, that she'd chosen too young, that she'd wake up one day and regret tying herself to this life. Caleb, she said gently, I'm not building an escape fund. I'm building our future. There's a difference. How do you know you won't change your mind? I don't. Neither do you. That's marriage. That's life. She took his hand. But every day I wake up and choose this. Choose you, choose the boys, choose the ranch. And I'll keep choosing it tomorrow and the day after. That's the best anyone can promise. He squeezed her hand, his expression softening. When did you get so wise? When I married a man who taught me that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. They rode on through the autumn prairie, the grass golden in the afternoon light, and Clara felt that settling sensation again. The sense of being exactly where she belonged. Winter that year was easier than the last. They were better prepared, more firewood, better supplies, stronger fences. The boys were growing too. Matthew had shot up 3 inches and lost 2 teeth. Ben had started writing poetry, terrible stuff that made them all laugh but showed promise underneath. And Wyatt had applied to the veterinary program in Denver, though he wouldn't hear back until spring. Clara's 20th birthday passed quietly in December. Caleb gave her books, real ones, not borrowed from anyone, bought specially for her in Cheyenne. The boys made her a cake that collapsed in the middle but tasted fine. It was perfect in its imperfection. On Christmas Eve, they had a visitor. Clara answered the knock to find Sarah Cunningham standing on the porch, wrapped in a heavy coat and looking nervous. Sarah, Clara said, surprised. What are you doing here? I know I should have written first, but I was visiting family in Sweetwater and I thought, if you have a few minutes, I'd like to talk. Clara hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in, it's freezing. They sat in the kitchen with coffee while Caleb took the boys out to do evening chores, giving them privacy. Your home is lovely, Sarah said, looking around at the clean kitchen, the signs of life everywhere. It's a work in progress. Clara waited, not making this easy. Sarah took a breath. I've been working up the courage to come here for months, ever since I sent that letter. I wanted to tell you in person how sorry I am. For everything. For abandoning you when you needed friends. For believing the things people said about you. For not standing up to my parents and telling them they were wrong to cut you off. Why didn't you? Clara asked. Stand up to them, I mean. Because I was a coward. Because it was easier to go along with what they wanted than to fight them. Because I was 16 and stupid and I chose comfort over loyalty. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. But that's not an excuse. I should have been better. Clara studied her old friend, seeing the genuine remorse there. What changed? Why apologize now? I got married last year. To a man my parents hated because he's a shopkeeper's son, not from one of the good families. Sarah smiled bitterly. They cut me off just like they made me cut you off, and I finally understood what it felt like, being rejected by people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. I'm sorry that happened to you. Don't be. It was the best thing that could have happened. Showed me who I really was, what I was capable of. Made me realize what I'd done to you. Sarah reached across the table but didn't quite touch Clara's hand. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. And I'm sorry. Clara thought about it, about grudges and hurt and the weight of carrying both, about how she'd spent so much energy being angry at her father and how exhausting it had been until she finally let him go. I forgive you, she said finally. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. but because holding on to it doesn't serve me anymore. Sarah's eyes spilled over. Thank you. They talked for another hour, catching up on years of missed friendship. Sarah told stories about her husband, about standing up to her parents, about building a life that was hers. Clara talked about the ranch, about Caleb and the boys, about finding strength she didn't know she had. When Sarah left, promising to write and visit again, Clara felt lighter somehow, like closing a door that had been stuck open, letting the cold in. That looked intense, Caleb said when he came back inside. It was. But good, I think. Clara leaned against him. Is it possible to forgive someone without trusting them again? Not only possible, but probably smart. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing history, just means you're not letting it poison your present. Clara thought about that as they prepared for bed. About all the people who'd failed her, her father, her old friends, the town that had stood by and watched her humiliation. She couldn't change what they'd done, but she could choose what power it had over her. Spring arrived with the news that Wyatt had been accepted to the veterinary program. He'd start in the fall, living in Denver during the school year and coming home for summers. The whole family celebrated, even as they processed what it would mean to have him gone. You're going to do great things, Clara told him the night after the acceptance letter arrived. I'm scared, Wyatt admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Then you pick yourself up and try again. That's what we all do. Clara smiled. Your mother would be so proud of you. Your father is. I am. You really think I can do it? I know you can. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met, and I mean that as the highest compliment. Wyatt laughed, then did something unexpected. He hugged her, quick and awkward, but genuine. Thanks, Ma, he said, then froze. I mean, Clara, I didn't mean… It's okay, Clara said, her throat tight. Either one is fine, whatever feels right to you. He nodded and left quickly, probably embarrassed. But Clara stood there for a long time, holding on to the word. Ma. She'd never expected it from Wyatt, had never pushed for it. But hearing it felt like acceptance, like finally being fully part of this family she'd helped build. Summer brought more work, but also small joys. Clara taught Matthew to read harder books. She and Ben started a garden that actually produced vegetables. She rode cedar across the prairie just for the pleasure of it, feeling the wind in her hair and the sun on her face. Some days were still hard, days when the work seemed endless and the problems too big, and she wondered if she was crazy for choosing this life. But those days were getting fewer, and they were balanced by days when everything clicked, when the ranch hummed like a well-oiled machine, and the family felt like proof that broken things could be rebuilt. In August, Clara missed her monthly bleeding, then missed it again. By September, there was no denying it. She was pregnant. She told Caleb on a Sunday evening after the boys had gone to bed. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. You're sure? He asked. As sure as I can be. We should probably get the doctor to confirm, but yes, I'm sure. Caleb sat down hard, like his legs wouldn't hold him. A baby. Our baby. Are you happy? Clara asked, suddenly uncertain. Happy? Clara, He looked up at her with eyes bright with tears. I never thought I'd get this again. After Beth died, I thought that part of my life was over. But you've given me everything I thought I'd lost. A partner, a future, hope, and now a child. Clara felt her own tears coming. I'm terrified. So am I. But we'll figure it out together. They told the boys the next morning at breakfast. The reactions were mixed. Matthew was thrilled, immediately declaring he'd be the best big brother ever. Ben looked thoughtful, processing. Wyatt was quiet, but Clara saw him smile when he thought no one was looking. Does this mean I have to share my room? Matthew asked. Not for a while, Caleb assured him. Babies are small. The nursery will be fine. The nursery is currently full of broken equipment and old saddles, Clara pointed out. Then I guess we've got work to do. They spent the next few weeks transforming the small room next to the master bedroom. Clara sewed curtains while Caleb built a crib from scratch. The boys painted the walls a soft yellow, and Ben drew animals on them, horses and cows and chickens, a whole ranch in miniature. News of the pregnancy spread as news always did in ranch country. Some reactions were kind. Neighbors bringing by baby clothes their children had outgrown, offering advice and congratulations. Others were less so. Clara heard through Tom Crawford that Margaret Wilson had made pointed comments about the timing, about how quickly Clara had secured her position. "Let them talk," Caleb said when Clara mentioned it. "They talked before, they'll talk after. Doesn't change anything real." He was right. The gossip couldn't touch what they'd built here. October arrived with Wyatt packing for Denver. He was nervous, excited, trying to hide both under teenage bravado. The whole family drove him to the train station in Sweetwater, Claire already showing enough that people noticed. "You'll write?" Ben asked for the third time. "I'll write," Wyatt promised. "And you'll come home for Christmas?" "Wouldn't miss it." When the train arrived, Wyatt hugged each of his brothers, then his father. Finally, he turned to Clara. "Take care of them," he said quietly. "And the new baby. And yourself." "I will. You take care of yourself too. And Wyatt?" She gripped his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a chance, when you had every reason not to." Wyatt's expression softened. "You earned it, every bit." He paused. "Ma would have liked you, a lot." Then he was gone, boarding the train with his single suitcase and his books and all the dreams Clara had helped make possible. On the ride home, Ben and Matthew were subdued. The ranch would feel different without Wyatt, quieter. But it was the right kind of different, the kind that came from growth rather than loss. Winter settled in gently that year, cold but not brutal. Clara grew rounder, moving more slowly, but still insisting on doing her share of work until Caleb put his foot down. "You're carrying our child," he said firmly. "That's work enough. Let the rest of us handle the ranch." "I'm pregnant, not broken." "I know, but humor me." So Clara focused on the bookkeeping, on the sewing, on teaching Matthew and Ben in the evenings. She wrote to Wyatt every week, and he wrote back with stories about veterinary school, about the city, about all the things he was learning. Christmas brought him home, taller somehow, more confident. He regaled them with stories and showed them everything he'd learned. On Christmas morning, he gave Clara a carved wooden box he'd made himself. "For the baby," he said, "to keep special things in." Clara cried, blamed it on pregnancy emotions, and cried some more when Wyatt didn't even tease her about it. The new year arrived with Clara enormous and uncomfortable in counting down days. The baby was due in late February, and every morning she woke up wondering if this would be the day. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks early. Clara was making breakfast when the first pain hit, sharp enough to make her gasp. "Caleb," she said calmly, though her heart was racing, "I think it's time." The next hours were a blur. The doctor was sent for, arriving just as things got serious. Caleb held Clara's hand through contractions that felt like they were tearing her apart. Ben and Matthew waited downstairs, quiet with worry. "You're doing great," the doctor said. "Just a little more." Clara was fairly certain just a little more was a lie, but she pushed anyway, screaming curses that made the doctor raise his eyebrows, and Caleb laughed despite his terror. And then suddenly there was crying, not Clara's, though she was doing plenty of that too, but a baby's crying, high and indignant and furious at being born into the cold Wyoming winter. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, perfect, angry creature. A girl. Clara had a daughter. They named her Elizabeth Margaret Mercer. Elizabeth for Caleb's first wife, Margaret for Clara's mother. Libby for short, because she was too small and fierce for anything as formal as Elizabeth. She had Caleb's gray eyes and Clara's stubborn chin, and a temper that suggested she'd inherited the worst of both parents. Clara loved her more than she'd known it was possible to love anything. "She's perfect," Matthew whispered, seeing his new sister for the first time. "She's tiny," Ben corrected. "She's family," Caleb said. And that was all that mattered. The weeks after Libby's birth were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Clara learned to function on no sleep, to nurse while doing bookkeeping, to measure time in feedings rather than hours. Caleb helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Libby when she wouldn't settle, changing diapers that made him gag, learning all over again how to be a father to an infant. The boys adjusted too. Matthew was obsessed with his baby sister, always wanting to hold her. Ben was more cautious but would sit and draw her while she slept. Even Wyatt, home for a visit in March, spent hours just watching her, a look of wonder on his face. Spring arrived with new life everywhere. Baby calves in the pasture, chicks in the henhouse, and Libby getting bigger every day. Clara walked the ranch with her daughter strapped to her chest, showing her the land she'd one day inherit, telling her stories about how they'd all ended up here. "Your grandfather tried to trade me for a horse," she told 6-month-old Libby, who gurgled and grabbed at Clara's hair. "Thought I was worthless. But he was wrong. I was worth everything. I just needed someone to see it, and then I needed to see it myself." That was the real lesson, Clara thought. Not that Caleb had saved her, though he'd certainly helped, but that she'd saved herself. She'd chosen to leave, chosen to stay, chosen to build this life with her own hands. The power had always been hers. She just hadn't known it. One afternoon in May, Clara rode out to the north pasture where she and Caleb had talked about courting all those months ago. Libby was with Caleb at the house, giving Clara a few hours to herself. She dismounted from Cedar and stood looking out over the ranch, the house she'd helped repair, the barn with its new roof, the fences she'd learned to mend, the cattle that bore her calculations and negotiations, the accounts that showed profit instead of loss. Hers. All of it. Hers. Not because she'd married into it, though that was part of it, but because she'd earned it with sweat and stubbornness and refusal to quit when things got hard. The girl who'd stood outside Murphy's saloon, humiliated and hopeless, would barely recognize the woman she'd become. And Clara found she didn't miss that girl at all. She'd been broken down until she could be rebuilt stronger. A rider approached from the direction of the house, Caleb, coming to find her. "Libby okay?" Clara asked as he dismounted. "Sound asleep. Thought you might want company." They stood together looking out over their land, their life, their future. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Taking me from Red Hollow that day?" "Not even for a second." Caleb put his arm around her waist. "Best decision I ever made, trading absolutely nothing for something priceless." Clara leaned into him, feeling the warmth of the sun and the steady beat of his heart, and the certainty that this, all of this, was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd been measured against a horse once and found wanting, but she'd learned that other people's measurements didn't matter. What mattered was how you measured yourself, what you built with the chances you were given, how you chose to define your own worth. Clara Mercer, wife, mother, rancher, survivor, had built a kingdom from the ashes of her worst day. Not a kingdom of land and cattle, though those were part of it, but a kingdom of belonging, of love freely given and earned through action, of strength discovered in the breaking and the rebuilding. Years later, when Libby was old enough to understand, Clara would tell her the whole story. About the trade that wasn't, about the father who failed, about the man who saw worth where others saw none. But mostly, she'd tell her daughter about finding her own strength, about choosing her own path, about learning that the most valuable thing anyone owns is their own sense of self. And hanging in the barn, above the old saddle from the chestnut horse that had started it all, Caleb's carved words would still read, "The horse that led me home." But Clara knew the truth. The horse hadn't led her anywhere. She'd led herself, step by step, choice by choice, until she'd built a home worth having. That was the real story. Not of being saved, but of saving herself. Not of being valued by others, but of learning her own worth. Not of happy endings, but of hard-won beginnings that led to lives worth living. And in the end, that was worth more than any trade, any price, any measure of gold or horses or anything else the world might offer. It was worth everything.